Hello dear film lover.
Welcome to FilmHead again. In this year, lots of movies including the genre of mystery, thriller, sci-fi, horror, action, and suspense are released that are must-watch film for you. Today we will inform you top 10 best of those films. So let's start, and please do subscribe our channel, FilmHead, to know every new release of movies at perfect time. Number 10. Project Dorothy. Project Dorothy 2024 is written by George Henry Horton and Ryan Scaringe and directed by George Henry Horton. It is about James and Blake, two thieves portrayed by Tim Dazarn and Adam Budrin, who infiltrate an abandoned facility to escape the law. Unknown to them, the facility is home to a dangerous artificial intelligence named Dorothy, voiced by lauded scream queen Danielle Harris. The things that are invisible can be among the most terrible things, both as an adult and as a child. Large, open areas, but is there something there that you can't see or hear that's lurking in the shadows or right around the corner? A mysterious movement, a menacing voice. The terror has been bottled up by director George Henry Horton for his next picture, Project Dorothy. The quality of the performances varied. Some were great, others were decent, but occasionally a line fell flat. The characters were okay. The standout character was James, the leader of the pair. The other characters were well presented, but somewhat shallow. Dorothy's motivations weren't different from most rogue AIs in fiction, but we enjoyed her big personality. It may stumble from time to time, but we thought Project Dorothy was an enjoyable experience. It was middling at the start, but once Dorothy started interacting with the other characters, things got far better. If you're a fan of micro-budget films, the final act might make Project Dorothy worth a watch once it makes its way to Tubi, but there are too many better films about malevolent AI to make it a priority. Number 9. Sunrise. Sunrise is Pierce's second collaboration with director Andrew Baird, following their 2021 sci-fi caper Zone 414, which was also kind of terrible. The opening exposition explains the legend of the Redcoat, a First People legend roughly equivalent to a vampire for the purposes of this story. Generic dialogue and lack of character depth kills the sometimes promising Sunrise, which works best when it has a grit that reminds one of the best vampire flicks of all time, Near Dark. But that doesn't happen nearly enough. Once again, we're in a dark corner of the world, a place where hate is allowed to grow, and not all of the monsters are supernatural. The best elements of Sunrise play with that latter idea, arguing that racism and violence are more terrifying than bloodsuckers. But the film too often feels like the story of a MAGA monster and the brutality he inflicts on an immigrant family onto which a vampire story was unsuccessfully grafted. This is an extremely self-serious dirge of a movie with a sharp performance from Guy Pearce, but no idea what to do with him or the decent ideas it has under its surface. Number 8. The Seeding. The beginning of The Seeding, a dismal horror film about a hiker who becomes stranded in the desert, will make you cringe. A toddler's bleeding face is shown in incredibly close-ups as it gnaws on a human finger. For a little period, the child nibbles on the finger, and then the camera abruptly pans back to reveal him staggering across the desert. The Seeding benefits greatly from its evocative location photography, credited to director of photography Robert Leitzel. The movie's eerie ambience also barely compensates for its creator's otherwise wispy approximation of psychosexual dread, which is often defined by generic folk horror atavism and a lot of unprocessed misanthropy. Director Barnaby Clay successfully keeps viewers on our toes, even if a lot of his movie feels like a series of programmatic jabs at our complacence. The Seeding is mostly good for constant overdetermined shocks. There's some grindhouse poetry in Clay and Leitzel's images, but it's never as lyrical or as articulate as it needs to be. With a day-and-date release, The Seeding might be better enjoyed on the big screen. Its visual scope would certainly play better in a theater than on a laptop, and its existential themes could benefit just as much. Waxing poetic on the helplessness of fatherhood is just better in an AMC. Number 7. Wanted Man. This is an action thriller that is well worth sitting down and spending 85 minutes on watching. This film is about Johansson, who is an aging detective and hoping to save his job. An aging detective travels to Mexico to extradite a woman who witnessed the murders of 2 DEA agents. Once there, he realizes that bad hombres on both sides of the border are now gunning for him. Wanted Man gives us one of Dolph Lundgren's most challenging characters to date who isn't especially sympathetic at the start, but he has a nice arc and is never less than engaging. This is more of a character piece with Johansson going through an arc, which although we see it coming, it's nicely done and is never overly preachy. Overall, Wanted Man provides one of Dolph Lundgren's most interesting characters in several years, and we get several bloody shootouts to keep things moving. I doubt it will make anyone's best of the year lists, but it's still a solid action picture. Number 6. Aftermath. The latest work from Hungarian directors Jurgo Elix and Joseph Galai. A voiceover opens Aftermath to establish this world where humanity is on the verge of an important change. Aftermath opens with Dr. Jane Dunning talking about a major medical breakthrough before abruptly cutting away to Kate hurriedly packing a bag and hitting the road. First of all, there is more of a science fiction thriller feel to it than his usual supernatural horror plots. There's also a very strong emotional element to Aftermath, as Kate deals with the mystery of where she is and how she got there, and the memories of her life before the accident and the answers, both recalled and uncovered, that they're leading her to, something that becomes more important to the plot as the film goes into its final act. Overall, Aftermath is a good film, but it does suffer from some over-familiar subject matter and an abrupt change of pace in the final act. It also leaves some nagging questions unanswered. Number 5. Amelia's Children. This film is about Edward's searches for biological family in Portugal. He finds a villa and reunites with his long-lost mother and twin. But their shared past holds a dark secret that will forever change his understanding of his identity and origins. It is unfortunate how fast Amelia's Children transitions into something generic and familiar immediately following a rather tense sequence centered on something as horrifying as infant children being abducted at night from their home. After an onslaught of the usual reality-bending visions and nightmares that typically make up cliched horror movies like this, Amelia's Children reveals the nature of the supernatural aspect to much disappointment. The narrative trajectory of Amelia's Children is so telegraphed, derivative, and predictable. Its story is playing with some nasty ideas and does have some impressively grotesque makeup effects, and it is, at the very least, entertaining horror schlock becoming absurd in its climax. A stronger film might dive into how the truth would psychologically destroy someone, but that's all chess pieces for shock value here. Number 4. Roadkill. Warren Fast's Roadkill sees a young woman and a drifter end up in a murderous situation that twists and turns more than the road they travel on. There are times it might have been better to take the less challenging path, however. The story of Roadkill begins with the first of two unnamed protagonists. The boy who will become the hitchhiker is shown living a horrible life as a child in a flashback. A sadistic mother is irate to find him in the family home instead of sharing the kennel outside with the dog. A nice throwback road thriller with muscle cars, drifters, and women in low-rise jeans. It's got some fun twists, even if they come across a bit muddled if you think about it for more than a second. Roadkill plays out like a low-budget version of Freeway with a very young Reese Witherspoon and a very pervy Kiefer Sutherland. It is a film with multiple twists and surly characters, and while the story is small-scale, we appreciate the film never really exceeding the limitations of the budget. This means that it delivers some lo-fi car chases, some okay choreographed fight scenes, and some limited, but potent gore. Number 3. Hellhound. Hellhound was a limited release in 2024 on Friday, January 12, 2024. There were 20 other movies released on the same date. As a limited release, Hellhound will only be shown in select movie theaters across major markets. To be fair, Hellhound sort of succeeds in trying to be a little creative and thoughtful. There's a fair amount of decent content in this admittedly B-grade action film. Firstly, there's a not wholly original story that still tries to take a thoughtful moral stance, reasonable acting, and well-considered exposition. The synopsis of this film is, while hunting down a brutal kingpin, one error sends an elite hitman on a downward spiral that devolves into all-out war on the streets of Thailand. Hellhound is a pretty bleak and violent action/thriller centered around a hitman's final job. Louis Mandylor is good as the lead, and the cast is rounded out with other good actors to help deliver the weighted dialogue. The film looks good, sounds good, and the action is choreographed and shot very well, definitely the highlight. Number 2. The Vampire Next Door. Casting The Vampire Next Door, a coming-of-age feature film with a few vampires. Synopsis. When 20-year-old Cameron discovers he has a female vampire living next door, she enlists him to help her avenge the murder of a former lover. Cameron reluctantly agrees and goes along on the adventure, until he finds out the main target is his 5-year secret crush. A typical 20-year-old girl next door is actually a 200-year-old vampire on the run. Successfully hiding out in a small town for years, she's discovered by her rival and must fight for her life. The film is longer than it should be and could do with some editing. It clearly reaches back to some of the 80s high school vampire films and also includes a Cyrano de Bergerac plot. The vampirism is underexplored. The hunts are over quickly. The whole thing felt plot light and not tight. The acceptance was unbelievable, not just of Victoria being a vampire and that he should help her, but in the resolution of the primary plot. Number 1. Butcher's Book 2 Raghorn. In the excellent Canadian rural cannibal horror film Butcher's Book 2, Raghorn, written and directed by Adrian Langley from a tale by Langley and Colin Casagrande, something serious is swinging deep in the woods, aside from the torso strung on a chain. Butchers introduced a family of sadistic butchers living in the backcountry who see anyone that crosses their path as dead meat. In Butcher's Book 2, Raghorn, the story continues when a car accident leaves the captors in the hands of brutal cannibals who plan to hack them up for meat. Rowena is running through the woods half-naked and bloody. We then meet the people-eating good ol' boy Clyde and his hulking mutant brother Crusher. Brian pulls into the gas station down the road from the forest. The way the mutant brother is shot is genius, with his face always obscured with focus tricks or angles. In theory, it may sound distracting, but in practice, it makes Crusher all the more menacing. He's constantly lurching up in the corner of your eye. There are lots of noir elements that are used to enhance the plot structure. These darker concerns go a long way to make the victim's plight more engaging instead of just partying while waiting for the body count. Butcher's Book 2, Raghorn shows that you can't judge this book by its cover. This is some highbrow filmmaking for a bloody lowbrow good time. The story is original, as far as man-eater flicks go, and the director has borrowed from the best.